The storm ripped through the prairie like a devil unchained. By the time it reached the chapel, the roof was already gone. Wind howled through shattered stained glass as Amos knelt in the rubble, blood trailing down his cheek, his hand clenched tightly around a mud-soaked lace glove. "Claire!" he cried, voice swallowed by thunder. Smoke billowed from the horizon where the barn once stood. Pieces of her wedding dress fluttered from the treetops, ghostly shreds of satin and tulle. Then he saw her, pinned beneath the chapel's fallen crossbeam. Her face was streaked with dust and blood, but her eyes were open, defiant, still breathing, still his wife, though only yesterday she'd been a stranger paid in gold and secrets. "Why'd you come back?" she rasped. Amos stared at her, heart pounding. "Because I never should have let you go." And somewhere in the distance, the wind began to die. Before we jump back in, introduce yourself and where you're tuning in from, and make sure you're subscribed. This story's going to take you through a whirlwind of lies, desperation, and something that might just become love, if they survive the storm. They said the prairie air cured some things, rattlesnake bites, fever, even grief if you gave it enough time, but not for Claire Mercer. Her boots left faint prints in the red Oklahoma dust as she walked the edge of the main street, her wide-brimmed hat tilted just enough to hide her eyes. She never went down the middle of town. That was for those who belonged. Claire stayed close to fences, always in the shadow of something. The buildings of Dalton Hollow hadn't changed in years. Weathered wood, squeaky saloon signs, and porches sagging under the weight of townsfolk who spent more time staring than talking. A dog barked from behind the tailor's shop and a child giggled. But the moment Claire appeared, it went quiet again. It was always like that. She passed the general store, where the clerk turned her back and pretended to count flour sacks. The preacher's wife peeked through lace curtains, and a pair of teenage boys whispered by the well, one pointing to Claire's hands. Burned scars, both of them, roped up to the forearms like dried riverbeds, twisted and white. Folks didn't know the full story, just bits. Her father's fire, the one that took the family barn, and two of her brothers. Claire was the only one pulled out alive, and some said it was the devil's trade that let her live at all. The children called her Cinder Hands. Adults just didn't call her anything at all. Claire didn't limp. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for pity. But her silence spoke volumes, and in a town like Dalton Hollow, silence was suspicious. She worked odd jobs, sometimes cleaning out barns, sometimes tending to sick animals when the vet was away. No one invited her to church picnics or quilting circles. At 27, she had no suitors, no family, no friends. Only a rented room behind the blacksmith shed and a cot that creaked every time she turned over in the night. Some nights she walked out past the cornfields to an old stump where the prairie dropped off. You could see for miles, just dust, moonlight, and the skeleton of what used to be her family's homestead. It had been 20 years since the fire, and still no one called it an accident. Once, a drifter stayed the night in Dalton. Claire had found him collapsed by the well from heatstroke and given him water. She even sat by his side while he recovered. The next morning he asked her to leave town with him. She'd said no. Not because she didn't want to, but because it didn't feel real. People like Claire didn't get stories with second chances. They just faded, one silent day at a time. Rumors filled the gaps that truth refused to. They said she talked to herself. They said she was cursed. They said if you touched her bare skin, your luck would turn. No one knew that Claire could play the fiddle better than any man within 50 miles. No one knew that she kept a box under her cot filled with handwritten poems, or that she still lit a candle for her mother every Sunday evening. No one knew how loud the quiet really got for her. That spring, the wind came early. Dust kicked up, harder than usual. It stung the eyes and coated every windowsill. The local paper printed warnings about funnel clouds and dried-up creek beds. Folks prayed a little harder, boarded up their barns, and counted their candles. But Claire didn't pray. Not anymore. Then one afternoon, just before sundown, a stranger rode into town, tall, broad-shouldered, clean boots. His coat was fine but travel-worn, and his eyes, gray like whetstone, scanned the town with military precision. He tied up outside the sheriff's office, passed by the saloon, and stopped dead when he saw her at the well. Claire had come for water, unaware that anyone new had arrived. He stared. Not with fear, not with pity, just stared. She felt her heart stumble. He tipped his hat. "Ma'am." Claire hesitated. "Sir." He didn't ask about her hands, didn't look away, just said, "You from here?" "No one's from here," she said softly, and carried her bucket away. She didn't know then that his name was Amos Thatcher, that he'd come to town with a need and a plan, that he'd read her file, heard her name, and chosen her from the shadows on purpose. She didn't know yet that the town had offered her like a pawn to clean its conscience, or that she'd soon be standing in a chapel beside him, wearing a borrowed dress that smelled like lavender and dust. But she'd remember that first look, and for the first time in years someone would remember her too. The wind was changing again. You could smell it in the dirt. A stillness before something big. Claire stood outside the blacksmith's shed, a damp cloth in one hand, soot streaked across her cheek. She'd been helping repair a broken wagon wheel. Not that anyone had asked her to. She just showed up and worked. It was easier than being alone with her thoughts. Easier than wondering what it meant when a stranger looked at you like you weren't a ghost. He was back. Amos Thatcher. 2 days had passed since he rode into Dalton Hollow, and the town still hadn't decided whether to trust him or shoot him. Some said he was a land surveyor. Others guessed he was a bounty hunter, or maybe someone hunting darker things. No one could say for sure. He kept to himself, spoke in few words, and walked like a man who'd lived with danger long enough to stop fearing it. Claire watched from the shadow of the shed as he walked up Main Street again, boots clicking against the dry wood of the boardwalk. His coat caught the rising breeze, and the edge of his collar fluttered like it was trying to whisper something. She turned away, but he stopped in front of her. "You always this quiet?" he asked. She didn't look at him. Most people prefer it that way. He glanced at her hands, just for a second, but didn't linger. "I don't," he said. That was the first real thing he said to her. He didn't ask about her past, didn't try to solve her like a puzzle. He just sat on the edge of a trough and spoke about the weather, as if that was the safest thing in the world. "You can smell it coming," he muttered. "Big storms smell like copper and dead earth." Claire nodded, then surprised herself. "My father used to say the same." His eyes flicked to her face, softer now. "He's still around?" "No," she said simply. He didn't ask why. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. The stranger's voice kept echoing in her mind. Not the words, just the way he said them. Calm. Like the world hadn't yet broken him. The next morning, she found him at the livery, brushing down his horse. He nodded at her like it was natural she'd be there. She brought a bundle of apples, traded from the orchard outside town. She didn't know why she offered one, but he took it, said thank you, and bit into it like it mattered. They didn't speak much, but something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but awareness. Recognition. Like they both knew what it felt like to sleep with a knife under the pillow. The townsfolk noticed. By the end of the week, whispers grew louder. "She's got her claws in him," said Mrs. Whitmore to her cousin over pie. "Man like that could have had any widow in town," hissed the preacher's wife. "He must be broken too," said the barber, half jealous. Someone carved a message into her shed wall that night. "Witch's bride." Claire scrubbed it out with lie and tears. She didn't tell Amos. But he saw her raw knuckles the next day and offered her salve without a word. The blacksmith warned him. "That girl's bad luck. Been trouble since she could walk. You're new here. You don't know." Amos just stared at him. Then maybe it's time someone did. The blacksmith didn't say another word. On Sunday, Claire didn't go to the chapel. She never did, but Amos did. Folks whispered as he sat in the back, arms crossed, eyes steady. When service ended, he stood beside Claire on the edge of the graveyard, just outside the fence where the church wouldn't bury her family. "You don't believe," he said quietly. "I don't beg," she replied. He nodded. "Neither do I." Later that day, while they sat beneath a half-dead cottonwood tree, he finally asked, "What happened to your hands?" She hesitated. Then, My brothers were trapped. I didn't leave them. Fire doesn't care about good intentions. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he rolled up his sleeve to show a long scar across his forearm. Bullet. Missouri border. I didn't leave him either. She looked up at him. Did he make it? No, he said. But I did. It was the first time she smiled at him. Not much, just a flicker, but enough. They kept sitting, saying nothing, just listening to the wind press against the tall grass like a warning. One evening the saloon windows rattled with gossip. Lightning forked in the distance and thunder rolled low across the plains. Sheriff Milton pulled Amos aside behind the jailhouse. You should know what you're walking into, he said. I already do, Amos replied. No, the sheriff said grimly. You don't. That girl, Claire, this town's been trying to make her disappear for years. You tie yourself to her, you'll vanish too. Amos didn't flinch. Maybe that's the point. Claire stood outside her shed later that night. When he found her, I've got a proposition, he said. She raised an eyebrow. A marriage. In name only. A contract. Claire blinked. Why? My family's estate depends on it. They don't want a soldier. They want a settler. I need to show I've got roots. You need money. We both walk away later. She stared at him. And what do the townsfolk get? He gave her a sharp smile. Something to talk about. She paused. I don't believe in fairy tales. Neither do I, he said. But sometimes the story's the only thing that keeps people out of the fire. Claire stepped closer. One condition, she said. You never lie to me. He held out his hand. Deal. Her burned fingers touched his skin for the first time. No lightning struck. No curses came. Just warmth. And in the distance, the wind shifted again. It started with a whisper, like everything cruel in Dalton Hollow. Mrs. Whitmore claimed she'd seen Claire sneaking into the barn behind the saloon. The blacksmith's apprentice said he heard her curse the preacher. By sundown, the town was roaring with gossip. Claire Mercer, the scarred witch bride, was using her powers to seduce Amos Thatcher and poison the town from within. Claire didn't know the full weight of it until the sheriff came to her shed. We're holding a town meeting, he said flatly, not meeting her eye. You should come. She didn't want to, but Amos was already there, standing by the chapel doors, arms crossed as the townsfolk muttered and fumed inside. The crowd shifted as Claire stepped in, eyes cut through her like daggers. She felt her skin crawl under her shawl. Then Reverend Merton took the floor. There's concern, he began, voice oily with fake compassion, that something unclean's taken root here, that a man who once fought for order has now aligned himself with misfortune. Claire's throat burned. Mrs. Whitmore stood. She hexed my hens. All of them laid bloodied eggs last Sunday. That ain't a curse, someone called. That's malnourishment. It's not just her hands, the banker's wife hissed. It's her silence, her eyes. She's unnatural. They surrounded her like wolves who had found their moment, years of hate rising in the tide. Reverend Merton turned to Amos. You still intend to wed this woman? Amos didn't flinch. I do. She's brought nothing but death and misfortune. He didn't blink. Maybe she's just a mirror. Maybe you're finally seeing yourselves. The room erupted. Claire couldn't breathe. Then the banker stepped forward and, without warning, hurled a goblet of wine in her face. It dripped down her chin, staining her collar red. She's cursed, he spat. That's when Claire ran. She didn't look back, didn't hear Amos calling her name. Her feet pounded over the cracked dirt road, past the stables, beyond the town's edge, into the open prairie where no one could touch her. By the time the clouds broke, she was 5 miles out, boots soaked, and breath ragged. She didn't feel the sharp brush of thorns across her arms, or the mud sucking at her skirts. The sky let loose in one massive sheet of rain. She kept running, until she couldn't. Claire collapsed in a patch of wet grass, sobbing, so hard her stomach twisted. The world blurred around her. She didn't know where she was anymore, only that it was quiet, and she didn't have to hear their voices. She didn't want to go back. Not ever. Let them think she vanished. Let them win. Let the earth swallow her whole. It was near midnight when he found her. Not with a posse, not with fury, just a lantern in one hand and her shawl in the other. Amos approached like a man afraid to spook a wild animal. She didn't move when she saw him, just stared, half-dazed, eyes rimmed red. He knelt beside her, didn't speak, just draped the shawl around her shoulders. "I didn't ask you to come," she whispered. "I didn't wait to be asked." Claire shivered. "They humiliated me." "I know. They think I'm poison." "I don't." She looked at him then, raw and trembling. "Why are you here?" His voice was soft. "Because I've watched stronger people fall for less than what they threw at you. And you're still breathing." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I don't know how to fight anymore." Amos reached out, not to touch her, but to be near. "Then don't. Just rest." She leaned into him, slowly, cautiously, not like surrender, like survival. They sat like that for a long time, the rain easing around them, the wind whispering low through the prairie grass. He didn't try to fix her. He didn't promise it would be okay. He just stayed, and for Claire, that was enough. The next morning they returned to town together. Mud-caked, silent, and side by side. No one said a word as they passed. Amos helped her up the steps of the chapel, where a marriage license sat waiting. In the preacher's hesitant hands, Claire's fingers trembled as she signed her name, not because she feared what came next, but because for the first time, someone had seen her fall and hadn't walked away. The cabin was old, half-rotted, and overrun with nettles, but it was theirs. Amos bought it from a widower 2 counties east and moved it log by log with only the help of 2 borrowed mules and a stubborn determination Claire hadn't seen in years. They rebuilt it on the edge of Dalton Hollow, just beyond the fields where the wind howled freely and no one could pretend not to see them. They didn't ask for help, didn't take donations. Every board was hammered by hand, every stone laid in silence. Claire learned how to chink the walls. Amos taught her to saddle a green colt. They built a lean-to for firewood and split logs until their backs ached. In the mornings, she boiled coffee while he chopped cedar. In the evenings, they sat under the eaves, watching lightning flicker far off in the dark prairie sky. People still stared when they rode into town for feed or flour, but no one dared speak. Not after what happened in the chapel, not after Amos stood beside her like stone and shadow. They were still a marriage on paper. But the lines between what was written and what was real had begun to blur. She laughed more now. Not often, but it came, like thunder before a summer storm. He smiled more. Not wide, but real. They planted wildflowers outside the front step. She picked ones that smelled like her mother's apron, lavender and sage. He fenced the land with old posts and wire, marking it with signs in carved wood. No trespassers. No preachers. No bull. They began boarding horses for the surrounding ranchers. Word spread that Amos had soldier's hands, and Claire had a healer's touch. Animals that came in sick left standing. Colts that couldn't be broke learned to listen. The land felt different out there. A little harder, but a little freer. One night, Claire leaned against the barn wall, breath fogging in the chill. "We did it," she said. He looked up from the saddle he was mending. "What?" "We built something. Not perfect, but real." Amos nodded. "We ain't done yet." That was the same night the letter came. A rider from the north, soaked in sleet, handed Amos a folded envelope sealed in black wax. He didn't open it in front of her, just slipped it into his coat, said he needed a minute, and walked to the creek behind the cabin. Claire watched from the porch. When he returned, he looked like a man who'd buried something. She didn't ask. Not that night. But in the days that followed, he changed. Not in rage, not in distance, but in stillness. He stared longer at the horizon. Checked the gate 3 times before bed. Rode into town more often, alone. Claire felt the shift like a storm in her bones. Finally, she cornered him in the stable, arms crossed. What was in the letter? Amos didn't lie. My brother's dead, killed in Kansas. I'm sorry, she said gently. There's more. He met her eyes. He had a son, 8 years old. They've got him in state custody. Unless someone claims him. Claire's breath caught. You mean to take him? I mean to try, he said. He's blood. She didn't speak for a long time. Not because she didn't care, but because the words scraped her throat like, gravel, I'm not. She hesitated. I wouldn't know how to raise a child. You survived worse than he has, Amos said. You'd be better than most. That doesn't mean I deserve to be someone's mother. He stepped closer, voice firm. Claire, that boy's got nobody. I've seen what that makes people into. I won't let it happen to him. She looked away. What if he hates me? Then we teach him what love looks like. The night before he left for Kansas, Claire sat by the fire with her sewing in her lap and a storm outside cracking through the hills. You'll bring him back, she said. Not as a question. I will. And if I can't love him like I should? He reached out, not for her hand, but to press a thumb to the corner of her eye, gently wiping away a tear she didn't know had fallen. You loved me when you didn't have to, he said. That's enough for anyone. 3 days passed, then 5. On the 6th morning, thunder rolled low and distant. Claire saddled Amos's mare, rode to the high ridge, and waited. She saw them before they saw her, Amos on foot, leading the horse slowly. A boy rode behind the saddle, face pale and silent, clutching a burlap sack. Claire's heart thudded as they approached. The boy stared at her, wary, wild, like an animal unsure of a trap. This is Henry, Amos said simply. Claire dismounted, stepped forward. She didn't try to hug him, didn't kneel or coo or soften her voice. She just said, I made stew. You hungry? Henry nodded once. And that was it. That night, they ate together by lantern light. Henry spoke little, only enough to answer questions. Amos gave him the cot in the main room and placed his own rifle above the door, just in case. Claire watched, the boy as he slept. Thin, bruised, eyes twitching even in dreams. She knew that kind of fear, and she knew then, this home wasn't just theirs anymore, but peace doesn't last in Dalton Hollow. 2 days later, the sheriff came knocking. Got a letter from Kansas, he said gruffly. State says there's another claimant, one of Amos's old war brothers, says he wants the boy, and he's coming to take him. Amos stiffened. Who? Name's Eli Maddox. Says you owe him. Amos went pale. Claire stepped forward. What kind of man is he? The sheriff sighed. The kind who makes promises with blood. The kind who never forgets a debt. That night, Amos finally told her everything. About the war. About the fires they lit behind enemy lines. About the boy they left behind. About how Eli took the fall for a crime Amos committed and spent 5 years in a cell for it. Claire listened, cold and quiet. And now he wants your nephew, she said. He doesn't want the boy, Amos replied. He wants me to owe him again. They stood in silence. Then Claire lit another lantern, grabbed Henry's bag, and tossed it onto the table. What are you doing? Amos asked. Packing. For what? For war, she said, voice steady. This time, no one takes what's ours. The sun rose soft and gold over Dalton Hollow, casting long shadows across a town still shaken from the storm. The tornado had taken 3 barns, a roof from the chapel, and half the saloon sign. But it had spared the little cabin on the edge of the fields. Amos stood in front of the town hall, Henry clinging to his side. Claire stood beside them, her hand steady on the boy's shoulder. Eli Maddox had arrived an hour before, dusty and grinning, backed by a polished lawyer and a badge from Kansas. He looked at Henry like a man eyeing a poker hand he was sure he could win. Sheriff Collier tried to keep the peace. This is a civil claim now. If it goes to court, it'll be months before the boy knows where he belongs. Eli stepped forward, tipping his hat. Or the other party can concede. Be the decent man I always knew you were, Amos. Amos didn't move. His jaw was clenched tight. Claire could see it. The war in him, the guilt, the temptation to fold just to keep the boy safe. So she did what no one expected. She stepped forward first. Claire faced Eli with her scar exposed and her back straight. You've got papers, but we've got a home, a bed, warm food, a child who hasn't flinched in 3 nights. Eli chuckled. You think being a broken woman makes you a mother? No, she said, but surviving this town did, and if you're the kind of man who takes a child from someone just to make a point, I pray the judge sees you for what you are. The crowd murmured. Mrs. Whitmore turned her head. Even Reverend Merton said nothing. Eli's smile slipped. Just slightly. Then Amos stepped up beside her, his voice calm but thunderous. You want something from me? Take it. He turned to the crowd, to the banker, the preacher, the women who once crossed the street to avoid Claire. I did what most of you never had the guts to do. I married a woman you tried to burn down. And I'll say it plain. If choosing her means you shut your doors to me, so be it. I'd rather live in a house made of ash with her than in any of yours. The silence that followed was thick enough to crush a man. Then Henry slipped his hand into Claire's, and someone in the crowd, maybe the blacksmith, maybe the sheriff, started clapping. Slow, but honest. Then another joined, and another, until the hollow, for the first time in a long, long while, sounded like hope. Eli left that afternoon, eyes dark, teeth clenched, his badge tucked deep into his coat pocket. No one stopped him. That night, they didn't celebrate with noise or whiskey. There was no feast, no dancing, just 3 figures seated on the front porch of a rebuilt cabin, watching the prairie wind chase the stars. Henry dozed in Claire's lap. She held his hand and stared at the horizon. You ever think we'd get this far? She asked. Amos shook his head. Didn't think I'd get past winter. She smiled faintly. Neither did I. They sat in silence for a while longer. Then Claire said, Let's name the ranch. Amos looked over, surprised. You got something in mind? She nodded. Mercy Hill. He repeated it once, slowly. Mercy Hill. Then he kissed her hand, just once, and whispered, It fits. 3 months later, they took a trip to the old cemetery west of town. Claire placed wild sage and lavender on 2 graves, one for her sister, long gone, and one for Amos's brother, buried with no marker. Henry held both their hands as they stood between the headstones. I didn't know him, the boy said softly. Amos crouched beside him. You carry his name now. That's enough. Claire pressed her palm to Henry's chest. And one day, you'll show the world what it means. Closing scene. It snowed lightly that evening. The first frost of the season dusted the roof of Mercy Hill as the 3 of them stood at the fence, watching the horses huddled together near the barn. Claire reached for Amos's hand. He took it without hesitation. Henry leaned into her side, and for the first time in her life, Claire Mercer felt no need to run, explain, or hide. She was home. She was known. She was loved. She was never a curse. She was someone's miracle all along. Subscribe, and let me introduce you to the next miracle tomorrow.